Finally tonight, a quarter of a century ago, KTU went on the air. And from the start, Channel 2 has had a heavy commitment to news coverage. We are fortunate that Pat Wilkins, a member of today's news staff, has been with Channel 2 News almost from the beginning. On this special day, the 25th anniversary of Channel 2, Pat is uniquely qualified to reminisce about that quarter century.
The eruption of Mount St. Helens is easily the outstanding story of the past quarter century from the perspective of Channel 2 News reporting. Not only was that volcano a catastrophic event that killed and maimed and contorted the landscape, but it has been a continuing story, this violent cauldron, a threat still watched by the whole world. A news staff of 50 scrambled to tell that story, and former Channel 2 anchorman Richard Ross sees the initial coverage of Mount St. Helens as the highlight of his 3 decades as a Portland newsman.
The one I look back on with the greatest satisfaction, I think, was that all day long, almost ad lib coverage of what was happening when Mount St. Helens blew her top.
But a volcano, even if it is in our own backyard, does not a quarter century make. There have been thousands and thousands of other stories important in those 25 years in their own right, whether they span days, weeks, or only a few minutes. And that was true right from the beginning of Channel 2 News reporting. Proof is concealed in row upon row of film cans and boxes contained in the basement of Channel 2, a place where few people now go. Since the switch to videotape a decade ago, there is little call for film, particularly that in these dusty archives. And down here, too, is just one film editing bench, of perhaps only 2 or 3 left in the station, where there used to be a dozen or more. Don't think for an instant that I'm going to pull a Geraldo Rivera on you. There really is something in this vault. Every one of these pigeonholes contains a wealth of memories. Not simply because they were stories that we covered, but because they affected so many people. Violent windstorms, rampaging floods, riots, assassination of a president, construction of buildings, highways, bridges, and all in just the first few years of Channel 2 News coverage. The people who pioneered Channel 2 News were Les Nichols, news director, Bob Roberts, news editor, Tom Morgan, sports, and cameraman Chris Christensen and Carl Vermilya. Yes, a news staff of just 5 people. But change came rapidly. Just 7 months later, there were 2 new faces. I became news director, Larry Badger took over sports, Morgan moved to news editor, but we were still just 5. Nichols and Roberts left. This was the staff that reported events that included the awful Columbus Day storm of 1962. 21 killed and hundreds injured. Property damage was nearly $250,000. Former newsman Tom Morgan remembers difficulty in telling that story.
We had no power. A lot of film was shot, and as I recall, it was several days before the Channel 2 got back on the air, and most of our audience, a lot of our audience was still not on the air to receive a signal.
Right, because they had no electricity either.
They had no electricity either.
In those first years, President Kennedy was assassinated. Alaska was ripped open by earthquake. The Forestry Center in Portland burned to the ground, and Christmas floods of 1964 ravaged the state. But always, tragedy was tempered by the warmth of such stories as the birth of baby elephants. Along the way, the news staff grew from 5 to 7 to 15 to 20, then in 1972 to 30. That was the news crew that covered the terrible tornado that ripped through Vancouver that year. The crew that did KATU's live coverage of the raising of the center span of the Fremont Bridge in 1973. It was also in this time that part of a news story of world significance, a moonshot, was covered not by the news staff, but by our technical crew. A group of our techs was assigned to recovery of the Apollo 15. One of them, this man, Bob Kalstad, rode a helicopter and manned the camera that resulted in this spectacular close-up shot of the Apollo splashdown in the Pacific. That same Kalstad is currently Channel 2 station manager. My own favorite story concerns construction of the I-205 bridge and the day, June 13th, 1978, when surrounded by a leaky cofferdam, I stood on the bottom of the Columbia River.
And frankly, it isn't easy to become terribly comfortable with 56 feet of water over your head. but it's also terribly fascinating to be standing on the bottom of the Columbia River. Pat Wilkins, Eyewitness News, in the Pier 12 cofferdam in the middle of the Columbia.
Most of us old-timers consider the change from black and white film to color to be the first major change in news coverage. Then there was the development of a truly portable camera, one that could be, if not comfortably, at least carried on a shoulder. In just the past decade, there has been rapid development and evolution of electronic news gathering equipment, cameras, videotape, the ability to pick up stories live from anywhere, satellite distribution of stories to and from everywhere. Typewriters have been replaced by word processors. Of course, additional changes are in store. There will be changes in the makeup of the news staff. There will be changes in the kind of equipment used. But the basic job will always remain the same: gathering and reporting the news.
Camera 3. Camera 3. Coming up.
In Portland, Pat Wilkins on the 25th anniversary of Channel 2 News.
25 years is a long time. I can remember watching.
Oh, that's great. You've been here most of that time, Jim.
I was started when I was 10.
And, of course, the people you don't see here. We got Al Schwartz behind camera, who's been here for 25 years, and a lot of other technical people you never see. They're part of the great people here at Channel 2. Happy anniversary, Channel 2. 25 years, still going strong.
Good night, everybody.
And finally, KATU Television is celebrating its silver anniversary this month. The occasion calls to mind many of the events and changes which have taken place during the past quarter century. One gentleman who chronicled many of those events is Channel 2 newsman Pat Wilkins. And in this report, Pat reminds us how it was.
A quarter of a century of gathering and reporting the news at Channel 2 has been headquartered in this building, a former laundry converted to house Portland's KATU in March 1962. The most important story of that first year of operation was the terrible wind that struck on October 12th, the Columbus Day storm. And that was only the first of thousands and thousands of events reported in 25 years. Among them, the seaside riots of several years running, the D.B. Cooper skyjacking caper, our basketball team, the Trailblazers, win the NBA title, a flotilla of whales beached themselves on the Oregon coast, and the great story of the quarter century, the eruption of Mount St. Helens. Most people do not know that Tom McCall was offered the job of heading Channel 2's first news department. He declined, but everybody knows that after serving as both Oregon Secretary of State and Governor, he did join KATU as political commentator and remained until his death in 1983. An early news director was one Patrick C. Wilkins, the same Pat Wilkins delivering this report, and who headed a news department of just 5 in addition to the first weatherman, and who, through a succession of other news directors, saw the department slowly grow to over 50 in number during that 25 years. Scores of talented people who helped report the news have come and gone, but only one has ever actually retired from the news department, the venerable anchorman, Richard Ross. Ross seems to be even busier as a public relations consultant, but he says the pace is easier.
I miss you guys, but I don't miss the being on the air every night. No, it's this pace is fun.
Portland City Councilman Dick Bogle spent 15 years with Channel 2 News.
I think I feel now more of a sense of contributing to the community as an elected official than even as I did as a reporter, though I think reporters contribute mightily to any community in which they're operating.
Kirby Brumfield, Channel 2's first weatherman.
When I was at Channel 2, I can honestly say those were 12 of the greatest years of my life. It was just the fulfillment of a childhood dream.
And Tom Morgan, member of the original news staff who in recent years has driven a taxi to make a living.
And you know, as you look at the faces of people who do the news, it's mostly a pretty young crowd. And it stays that way. The old-timers just phase out. In fact, when it comes to how many stayed with the business and retired from it, I think you can count on one hand, maybe a finger or two for K2 News Department.
Also of that original staff, both cameramen, Chris Christensen and Carl Vermilya, have died. Sportscaster Larry Badger is said to be working on the East Coast, and I, the oldest and longest-term news staffer at Channel 2, might be expected to say, why, I've forgotten more than these new young whippersnappers will ever know. But I won't. I'm sure they'll learn as much during the next quarter century. Pat Wilkins, Channel 2 News.
That's nice. Pat put together a nice scrapbook there.
That's
That's
a good piece.
25 years.
We're glad to be part of it. That's our news at this hour. Good night.
Thanks for joining us. So long.